In the depths of Hive Nue in the Pan-Pacific region of Terra, a lone figure sat in his chamber and wept. He did not weep in terror as the Hive endured the bombardment of the traitor fleet above, or as a result of the attacks from traitor legion forces at the gates of the city. Nor did he weep from pain, even though his body was racked with pains and sores, and his mind damaged. No, this figure wept from the pain of guilt and memory, as they worked together to crush his spirit day by day. For even after all this time, he still dreamed of thunder, and that day upon the mountain, that day where everything he believed in the world died, where his brothers died. Durak sat alone, dreaming the same dreams and thinking the same dark thoughts. No matter how he looked at it, no matter what conclusions he came to, his heart always went to the same place. He was a traitor. He betrayed him. Durak was loyal. He had always been loyal. When they had asked to forge his body into a weapon, he did so without hesitation. When he was asked to bleed for the cause, he bled. Asked to fight, he fought. But that day on the mountain, when he had asked of him his life, he ran. He did not stand and fight as some of his brothers did. The thought of raising arms against him was an anathema to him. So he did not fight, he ran. He ran and hid in the dark places forgotten from sight. And even now, all these years later, that guilt and shame still haunted him. The sounds of renewed bombing from above roused his thoughts from the past to the present. Durak still couldn't believe that they had betrayed him, those who came after him. That anyone could betray him was an anathema, and when he heard the news his wrath almost drowned out his guilt for a time. But even now the guilt still ruled his mind. For did he not betray him when he ran? When he refused to accept his death with honor? These thoughts still raked at his mind. Klaxons and alarms began a few hours later, echoing out throughout the Hive city. Durak wondered if this meant the city had been breached, and he wondered how long it would take for the traitors to reach him. Durak looked in the corner of his chambers at his bolter and rusty combat blade, resting on top of the heaped pile of his still damaged power armor, and he wondered to himself if he should fight back when the traitors find him. It would be a fitting end for him, killing traitor. The sound of his chamber door opening caused Durak to look up, as he half saw a dozen people enter into his chambers. He never locked the doors, as only a fool would seek to harm him here. These people were all Underhive residents, and Durak recognized some of them. A young woman who had been set upon by a band of brigands that he'd rescued, a young boy he'd saved from being beaten by children a few years older than him. When Durak had first arrived in the Underhive, he had chosen to go to ground. This was before the guilt had consumed him. Durak started out by himself in the lower decks, scavenging supplies to survive, food and medicine to keep his body stable. Over time he evolved into fighting against the brigands and bandits that inhabited the dark places of human society. He detested people such as them. He had fought to bring unity to this world, and the greed and brutality of people like them besmirched that dream. Of course, in his battle against these dregs he had saved many mortals. He did not go out of his way to save them, but he could not deny their plight when they were in need. He fought to destroy those who he hated, those who besmirched the dream that he still clung to even now. Focusing back to the present, Durak realized that these people were all people he had saved in the past, and he wondered why they had come to him now. A young woman, still in her teens, was the first to break the silence and speak. "Sir, please, sir, we need you to help us. The traitors have almost breached the Underhive. Please, help us." Durak finally spoke. "Why do you want my help? What can I do?" The young woman looked at him in disbelief. "Sir, you surely must be kidding. What you can do is fight, and save us all, as you have done before." "I cannot help you. I cannot do anything." An old man in the back of the group shouldered his way to the front and raised his voice to the giant. "Are you a coward or a fool? Cannot do anything, my ass. I watched you rip a man's head off with your bare hands." The young woman spoke again. "If anyone can help defend us in the Underhive, it is you." Durak was doubtful. He was resigned to his death, and did not believe that he should fight. He had saved these people, it was true, but it was more about vengeance than kindness. But still, he didn't know. His mind and heart burned still with conflicting doubts. "Please, sir, the army and the legions have abandoned us. We need your help. We need any help." Durak's thoughts were piqued by this. The legions have abandoned the people? The army has abandoned the people? He had abandoned his people. Just thinking about it felt wrong. After all he and his brothers did, they fought for this world, they bled for this world, they died for this world, for him. And that he would abandon it? "Please, sir." This was the first time in many years Durak had had new resolve. While some of his brothers had fought back in the day for the sake of fighting, Durak fought for him, for his dream, and even if he chose to abandon this world to his fate, Durak would not. Even if he was a traitor in his own eyes, he would still fight for the dream, and the last oath that truly mattered. Durak slowly stood and spoke 2 words. "I fight." At the entrance to the Niue Underhive, Gangakuri loaded the last shell into his shotgun and watched the motley band of defenders prepared for battle. Conscripts, pressed civilians, rival gangers, all huddled behind barricades and prepared for battle. Meanwhile, the great iron doors of the main Underhive gate rattled from explosions and battering from outside. Kurei didn't know exactly what traitors she would be fighting, but she knew in her heart that they wouldn't last long. Her thoughts were piqued by the sound of bubbling and screeching metal, as she looked up and saw the blast doors of the Underhive melting away. Kurei racked the slide of her shotgun and prepared to die in battle. But then, suddenly, she turned around. In all her remaining years, she never knew why she chose that moment to do so. It was almost as if some force compelled her to do so, an unavoidable urge that required her to act upon it. The sight she saw would stay with her for the remainder of her days. A giant of a man, larger than any she had seen before, clad in an ornate yet faded golden armor, a plume of red cascading down from his helmet. He held an oversized gun in one hand and a blade in the other. This was a warrior whose presence alone was enough to still battlefields. He stood among them, fire in his eyes, and spoke with a voice as loud as thunder, even over the sounds of the bombs above. "You are children of Terra. No matter what comes through those gates, you will stand your ground." The blast doors bubbled away, and a horde of dark faces erupted through the gap moments later. Fire! A horde of autogun slug throwers and lass poured out into the now incoming horde of angry cultists and dregs, as they charged through the still melting hole in the doors. After over a minute of fire, the door was clogged with dead. It had seemed like the Underhivers had withstood the storm, but then the battle truly began. The doors bucked and smashed inward, and a horde of corpses flew into the chambers, showering the defenders in blood and guts. Following in behind them was huge hulking monsters, huge deformed beasts made up of multiple human and adhuman corpses stitched together and given life by foul magics. The Underhivers started to panic. Shots wavered and a handful ran, but the Golden Warrior stood unfazed. He called out to them, "Rally to me, children of Terra!" Then Durak charged into the beasts, rampaging into the monsters, hacking and slashing with his blade, cutting off heads and limbs as his fury was unbound. At the Golden Giant's courage, a few dozen Underhivers rallied and charged into combat alongside him, smashing and hacking and firing upon the beasts. A handful of the defenders fell, but the beasts' rampage was halted. A further 2 waves of beasts and cultists were repelled by the defenders, but then the battle turned from a storm into an inferno. Gas grenades started raining down into the chamber. The defenders who did not have such protection against the gas broke and ran. A few stood and fought, but either enveloped by the gas or cut down by the hordes following the cloud. Not that the traitor hordes were spared from the effects of the gas, and dozens were choked and poisoned by the fumes. And throughout it all, Durak killed and killed and killed. None was spared his wrath, and he ignored the gas like a wall of iron ignores the rain. He killed until there were no more foes to slay, or so he thought. Booming laughter echoed throughout the gas, deep and guttural. 7 large shapes walked through the gloom. The gas parted as they emerged, creating a circle of clean air around a storm of gas and death. They were large, bulky men, clearly warriors despite their size, yet they were still smaller than Durak, and he looked in disgust as he realized what they were. They were Astartes, or at least they had been. Durak recognized the corruption of sorcery. He had seen it before many times in the Unification Wars, but to see Astartes, those that were meant to replace him, be greater than him, to be able and seemed willing to fall to sorcery, disgusted him. The warriors and Durak stood and evaluated each other in silence before the warrior at the head of the 7 deformed Astartes began laughing. Well, this is something I would never have thought to see. In fact, I am almost awed. This galaxy is full of surprises. But what is it that amuses you, brother? Brothers, how well do you know your history? Does that matter? Because, my brothers, what we are looking upon here and now is one of the Emperor's own Thunder Warriors, our betrayed predecessors. The groups all started laughing as Durak remained in silence. So, Lost Thunder Warrior, I am surprised you still live. It was told to us all that you still died. Durak kept his silence. Not talkative. That is no matter. In fact, it is opportunistic that you are here. We do not need to be enemies. In fact, you should join us. Bring ruin to this hive and to Terra. Bring your wrath to the gates of the palace. I'm sure you'd want your revenge on the Emperor who betrayed him. It was Durak who began laughing. He speaks at last. What amuses you, friend? That you think he betrayed us. No, my successor. We betrayed him. Oh? That was not how I heard the story. Let me enlighten you, children of the supplanters. We betrayed him. We betrayed him by being unworthy, by being flawed and weak, unworthy of his grand vision, just like you. I think your age has gotten to you. You are speaking nonsense. Really, perhaps it was inevitable that our successors would be as flawed as us, would be great as failures as us. Perhaps only he is worthy of the dream. You really are as blind as you are flawed, but through the grandfather you may be healed and made anew, to bring down the false emperor, and to avenge your betrayed kin. Durak stood tall and spoke. For unity. The bloated warrior sighed. Fool. The warrior raised his arm, and a faint warp light surrounded his form and directed a warp blast against Durak, and faltered. The warrior reeled from the force and collapsed to the ground as Durak stood tall. Weaklings. He protected me. No sorcery can harm me. Then Durak fired his bolter, and the battle began anew. The first barrage of bolts ripped into the center mass of the closest Astartes. A normal volley of bolts like that would drop even a Thunder Warrior, and yet against the bloated mass it did nothing. Durek quickly switched approach and aimed for the bloated warrior's head. He fired, and the bloated warrior slumped to the ground, his head a pile of gore. The remaining Astartes, now in range, reacted and attacked. They returned fire upon him, dozens of bolts ripping into the barricades and rubble as Durek began ducking behind barricades and peeking out to return fire. Durek ducked in and out of cover, firing as he moved between the barrages of enemy bolts. Through this technique, Durek was able to slay 2 more Astartes. As Durek slammed the last magazine into his bolter and racked the slide, he cursed that he only had 2 magazines left for this battle. Durek switched his bolter to his offhand and drew his blade. He waited for a gap in the enemy fire, and then leapt forward and charged as the Astartes reloaded. His bolter rounds fired high, but they managed to drop another Astartes. The return fire ripped into his aged power armor, ripping through the outer plate, and shrapnel pierced into his skin. The remaining 3 Astartes didn't have time to react as Durek charged into him, using his superior strength to bash and hack into him. However, the Astartes were as durable as Durek was strong. The Astartes drew rusted blades and the fight began in earnest. The first Astartes was decapitated by a knife slash as the second Astartes drove his knife into Durek's shoulder, breaching the ceramite and piercing his skin. That warrior died for his attack. Durek put the last bolt round of his bolter into his skull. Durek twitched in pain as he felt the onset of poison burning into his body. The last Astartes warrior was unhelmed, and he swung out with a punch. Durek ducked inside the swing and grabbed the Astartes by the throat, crushing it. Before he died, the Astartes spat a gob of poison, melting the symbol of the Raptor Imperiale upon his chestplate. Durek snarled and ripped the Astartes' head clean off for the insult. Durek ripped the knife out from his shoulder and breathed heavily and smiled. He had just bested those supposed to replace him, and he smiled at the irony of it. 3 bolt rounds ripped into Durek's back, blasting out chunks from his torso and gut, forcing him to his knees. Guttural laughing from behind him broke through the pain of his new wounds. Flipping onto his back, Durek looked as the sorcerer that had collapsed before moved into his view. The false emperor forged your minds well, but the blessing of the grandfather protects me. He could have done the same for you, if you were not so weak. The sorcerer drew a bolt pistol and pointed it at Durek's head. And so passes the last Thunder Warrior. I hope you would give my regards to the Emperor when the Warmaster crushes the life from him. Durek knew that he was dying. It did not take a gene-forged mind such as his to know that. He summoned the last of his strength and surged forward, tackling the sorcerer to the ground, wrestling with him. The 2 grappled and punched, exchanging blows against each other, but Durek was weakening, and the blows from the sorcerer were ripping into Durek's already damaged body. Durek noticed the bolt pistol resting a meter away to his left, and allowed the sorcerer to push himself off towards the gun. The sorcerer pounced on him and began strangling Durek. Durek fumbled and scrabbled on the ground but managed to grab the corrupted bolt pistol. Pressing the muzzle under the sorcerer's chin, Durek fired, the last round blowing the head off the sorcerer. Darkness began to take Durek as he listened to the sounds of battle and the sound of bombs fading from his hearing. His last thoughts were the sound of thunder and that day upon the mountain. Only this time he imagined himself casting his weapons aside and letting the golden watchdogs take him. So Durek died alone amongst the bloated remains of those who were made to replace him.